All right. Yeah. Okay. Can you, over a little more? Okay.
Trying.
Perfect. Yeah.
There you go, man.
Welcome, folks, to our. What do you call this, David? This is our debrief on the 5-year
Yes.
eGrocery sales forecast and trend analysis that has been long in the making. All right. So let's dive into this. I got 3 hard-hitting journalistic style questions that I want to pose, and then we can go in whatever direction our hearts desire. So let's.
Yeah. Good.
And I actually did read the report this time, so
Good for you. I lived the
I'm
report,
learning.
Mark. So
Just yeah. Apparently, you lived a little too long in it, but that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, it's like anything. It's hard to give up after a while, like a kid. So I mean, not that you give up your kids, but they move out and they grow up. So
Yeah, I won't comment on your parenting. Anyways,
well,
shifts in market share. I want to talk about the shifts in the market share. So
first of all, there's market share and then there's forecast. Now, we're here talking primarily about the forecast, although I can see where you're going here. But go ahead.
all right. So you mentioned that mass retailers, specifically Walmart, you cite Walmart, are capturing a larger share of the e-grocery market due to their cost advantages. So can you elaborate on how smaller, more conventional supermarket chains, or independents for that matter, can adapt their strategies to remain competitive in the currently evolving market as you see it?
That's a good question, Mark. So let's break that down. So
You don't sound surprised.
well, I mean, it's the first time I've heard of it. So how can they compete more effectively against Walmart in today's climate is what the
Yes.
question is.
Yes.
Well, I think first we'll just recognize that Walmart is extremely well positioned. First, because they had invested quite early in
Yeah.
building out their capabilities, and then secondly, they own on the street and in the consumer's mind the low price position. So those two things have come to roost for them, and the pandemic has helped them at least twice, as we talked about before. So what does a regional grocer have to do? Well, one thing they probably should stay away from is just fixation on price. And we know that they're not trying to compete directly on price for a basket of goods, because Walmart is 10 to 20% less than supermarket banners. We know that.
Yeah.
But it's really rethinking price, right? And you guys published a report. You commissioned us to help you with it last year that set the stage for how to rethink the role of pricing in a way to remain competitive against someone who owns the low price position and who owns the largest market share in this emerging area. And looking at that from a standpoint of what do our customers value from us? And it's not to say they don't value the prices that you charge, but they're not shopping with you
Right.
because of the prices that you charge, right? It's the products and the services that you offer. And so reorienting around that and reflecting that in the way you go to market would help you compete more effectively in some ways, because, if you're just defending your base business today and struggling to grow it, then that approach could help you improve the profitability of the business that you still maintain. Right. And we have seen some movement afoot with regional grocers making this shift, albeit it's at a glacial pace, Mark. So, I think the first thing that I would say, even before doing that, I guess, would be, look at what you thought the world would be in 5 years.
Yeah.
What's changed, what hasn't, and how does that impact how you go to market?
So,
I mean,
so
that's
let me
the
ask
simple
you.
way they're saying it.
So let me ask you. So you have conversations just like we do. You have conversations with a lot of regionals. So when you provide this advice, this guidance, do you politely do they understand what you're saying? Do they accept what you're saying, or where do they get roadblocked?
Yeah, I think there's probably little disagreement about understanding. They understand that. Where the issue comes is that their existing capabilities may preclude them from doing some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And in order to do those, they need to make adjustments elsewhere first, right? I mean, you think about how you structure fees. We talk about a move away from tiering based on spend and tiering instead based on, when the customer wants to receive it. And we've seen this, play out. And even Walmart does this now with delivery, where they have two levels of expedited service under their express that consumers or their customers pay a premium for. That is indicative of the type of suggestions we've made to regionals, albeit it's now been adapted to work within the Walmart model. But I think the issue today is, oh, hey, we agree that's what we need to do, but we're just not set up to do that. So we kind of have to figure out how to do this with the constraints that are already in place with our legacy system or the system that we're currently using. That's probably where most of the issue is today, with exception of when it comes to pricing. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just gonna, do you have any advice? So let's say a regional grocer wants to make that mid-course change. What is your advice? I mean, if they're locked into certain legacy systems, contracts, providers, do you have any advice as to how they can more rapidly adapt to the changing market conditions?
Well, I mean, there may be many little things that you can do, but without addressing the fundamental issues that will affect demand and what customers do and how they act, some of those things just are lower priority. So where we've had this conversation and we've run into this with retailers when we've made our recommendations, one of the secondary recommendations that flow from the realization is, well, I'm currently under a contract and the capabilities of that contract don't enable me to do that. Well, then, when that contract comes up for renewal is the perfect time to, try to implement some of those pivots by looking for the vendors or providers that can support you in a way that makes sense going forward. So understandably, we're in this transition period. Someone may be in a 2-year contract. They may say, hey, this is good enough. It's not great. It doesn't have everything. We understand it, but we have to kind of bide our time before we can make those changes.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, it's not, there's not a panacea, unfortunately. You make your bed, you got to sleep in it too. So again, we can talk about various aspects of it, but I think fundamentally, scratch that.
Yeah. And I would say start somewhere, right? You don't have to wait until everything is baked in order to make a shift. Start somewhere. You can start small.
Yeah.
Around the outer edges.
There's obviously a lot of buzz around personalization, everything that comes with that, and that area better than I do, Mark. So some of the low hanging fruit may be on, how do we better engage or connect with our existing customers, and personalization through all of its means is a way to do that. Obviously, if there are other things that you could be working on while you bide your time before you move to that new platform, obviously looking at your service times, that wait time, whether it's delivery or pickup, is a strong influencing factor on repeat. So is things like, fill rates, and the fill rates could be contingent on your ability to manage inventory, sync it with your online platform and things of that sort. So again, you can see how things can back up and be prioritized according to the ability to execute those.
Yeah. And again, it talks about, it goes back to defining what your strategy is and how to get from here to there. And it's not necessarily going to happen overnight, but at least start with your strategy and put those building blocks in place.
Yeah, and then I think just understanding, what flexibility you have in your suite of tools to adapt to these changes as they surface and they become more important.
Yep. Let's get back to the forecast, and I want to highlight one of the areas, and we've sort of touched on it already, but it's about the increasing order frequency. And so the forecast highlights that increasing order frequency is a key driver of eGrocery sales growth through up to 2028, and aiming for more frequent orders from monthly active users who currently place orders, more than one order per month. Can you discuss what are the specific strategies or innovations that grocers could consider implementing to boost order frequencies?
Well, I think the top of mind area that we're seeing even regionals look at are various forms of subscription programs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I hesitate to say membership, that connotes something a little more expansive, but subscription programs as a way to entice that customer who may be placing a single order with you each month to make a second, because when they move from one to two, that subscription would have more than paid for itself. So that's one way. I think another way of looking at the subscription also is that it's used to reward your heavier users on a frequency basis. So someone who's already placing two or more orders would look at a subscription as a no-brainer, saying, hey, gee, why wouldn't I do that? I'll save money right out of the gate without changing anything. And so from that perspective, it serves as a way to build retention by kind of handcuffing them to you in a good way. And so when you protect your more frequent or reward your more frequent customers and you entice those two elements will help bring order frequency up. But another aspect is then finding the right message and the right hook to actually go a little farther outside the monthly active user base, so at least the way we look at it on our monthly cadence, and go to those less frequent users, those who may have shopped with you 2 or 3 months ago. And we don't know why they're that light a user online, but there may be occasions or missions that we haven't yet really probed or understood that we could play to, or we haven't provided the level of service that they would look at and say, okay, I'll make this part of my routine, my monthly routine, right? As opposed to an occasional online purchase driven by a specific need. So I think those would be some practical examples, Mark, of ways to build order frequency. I think you could extend into looking at rewards. Some are using quote unquote, banner dollars as a way to give back and essentially deal them back in, because those dollars are only going to be applicable to purchases, on that site. So again, that would just be one more example.
Yeah, and to that, I mean, those are all great examples. I would add, look at what you're messaging, because you had mentioned it, messaging to your customers, your more frequent customers, and making sure that what you're messaging is relevant and it connects with them and offers them something unique to entice them to come back and purchase online. That's definitely an area of opportunity I think a lot of retailers have in terms of personalization and relevancy.
Yeah, I mean, recently I was watching an Airbnb commercial and I thought they did a nice job aligning their proposition with customers' values. I don't know if you've seen it, but they start with a contrast of, if you're on a vacation with your children and you're staying at a hotel, your children's bedtime is your bedtime, implying you lose a lot of flexibility and control when staying at a hotel, as opposed to at an Airbnb, you can still enjoy the rest of the evening. I think if you take snippets of that and translate it for, well, what does that look like in the grocery space? Having messages that align with some of the trade-offs or the emotions connected with grocery shopping or not having to grocery shop could be potentially messages that resonate louder than simply, the focus on same time, save money, right? I mean, it's a very straightforward, clear message, but may not resonate with someone who has a young child at home and is working.
That's a very good point, and I like the example. And no, I haven't seen the commercial, but it's
they probably
relevant.
just haven't made it up to Canada yet. I don't know. Do you have Airbnbs in Canada?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
I got one last question for you, and then maybe we can take this in another direction. Related to the forecast itself,
Yeah.
What are the emerging trends that you've identified and innovations in online shopping that you believe will shape the industry in the next 5 years up until 2028?
Oh, I thought you were going to go the other way and talk about the gray swans, but
We can do that too.
well, that I think that may be easier in the sense that folks may be wondering about our approach to the forecast and what factors may be weighing on the magnitude of the forecast, which we would expect is probably on the lower end compared to others out there. So
by all means, let's talk about the gray swans then.
So, if we look at that,
first of all, define what you mean by gray swan.
A gray swan is a known event that has low probability of occurring during a set time period. However, if it does occur, it will have a dramatic impact on the business. That's essentially what the gray swan is, right? COVID was a gray swan. We knew that pandemics were possible. We just didn't know when and where and to what degree it was going to happen. So that's not a black swan. A black swan would be an unknown event, and
something
it's hard
completely unexpected.
Right, and we could theorize what those are, but that's academic. So I think we know that this is a higher cost to serve area. We know that retailers are trying to find ways to lower cost, and what we've seen is automation that has come in a couple forms. One automation would be primarily around the fulfillment center, and we've talked recently about the challenges of that. And we don't see automation in that form or that fashion having material impact industry-wide in the next 5 years. And that's saying a lot. It's not saying MFCs don't have a role. It's just that the role needs to be redefined. It may need to be broader and include elements of in-store, just to be clear. We also have seen retailers show interest in autonomous delivery vehicles as the way to remove costs, primarily in the form of the driver, in delivering or distributing those orders to the customer. Now, that's still some time away, because even in those pilots that are using autonomous vehicles, or what look like driverless vehicles, are really remotely controlled autonomous vehicles, right?
Yes.
If that's the right word. So there's still a labor component under or behind the screen, so to speak. And it's not necessarily lower cost, because it's hard to offshore, that labor, because then there becomes greater latency issues between what the sensors detect and what the operator reacts to. So we don't see those necessarily having dramatic material impacts on the broader industry over the next 5 years. I think, and that would include, the aerial vehicles as well, drones.
The drones,
They may have a narrow use case with certain cubed and sized items, but from a material standpoint, that's not going to move the needle for the industry in the next 5 years. It may be helpful for certain retailers, but even the deployment and operation of those things still have a lot of questions.
Certainly not in a volume or at a scale that's going to fundamentally change someone's business.
Another one that's probably closer to the horizon, but we still put in that camp, is the reclassification of independent contractors. We have seen at a local level, Seattle's a recent example of this, with changes in the regulations in terms of pay structure for those drivers. And when that occurs, we have seen an incremental cost introduced to the service that the customer currently is required to pay. In the case of Seattle, it's $5. And at the same time, especially when it's not a federal or even a state level regulation, we're starting to see restrictions placed on where someone who is using that service within that locale can buy online. So if you're in that Seattle proper area, they've essentially geofenced that area so that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to find a retailer outside that market to shop from. And that's a consequence of those regulations. So that reduces availability. Reduced availability impacts demand. The incremental cost, especially that explicit incremental cost, that is avoidable. I mean, someone who goes online is used to seeing fees and charges and yes, the tip, but you're in that area, you now have a separate line item, at least today it's separate, that's a regulatory fee that's been added on. Each and every one of those creates friction for the customer because they can avoid paying that. And in order to avoid paying that, they just need to change their behavior. And their behavior that they need to change is moving from delivery to pickup. And not a lot of people are going to do that. So if cost becomes a bigger issue, then they may just revert to in-store because now all the cumulative effects of all those added costs, the fees, the charges, the tips, and now the regulatory fee, make it so that shopping online has become much more expensive, especially if you're looking at the marketplace. So that would weigh on demand. That is something we said we're not factoring into the analysis. So if any of those three, and namely the last one, occur at a broader level, like the federal level, then we would anticipate some fairly dramatic changes because, again, we would see that cost pass through to the customer. That would lower demand. Or, they come up with some other creative way of hiding that. But in either case, it's an increased cost that's going to hurt the profitability for the retailers and the providers.
David, great insight as usual. I got one last question before we end this discussion. Is there anything in the forecast or in what we've talked about today that you want to express to the audience?
Anything in the forecast? Well, I think the main thing I would leave, Mark, is that as retailers listening to this video or recording or looking at the report, remember that this is a national level view and forecast for the U.S. We expect, and we see already, that certain formats or banners are going to potentially grow at stronger rates. Yeah, that's essentially reflected in here, but this is not intended to say, who's going to win in 5 years. That goes more into our market share analysis, but that we can still have winners and losers within this marketplace, and we can still see retailers, believe it or not, who are going to grow potentially 10% or more in the coming years, but they'll do so within the context of that broader market that isn't growing as quickly. So what that really means is the pie is only getting a little bigger. So as others grow faster than the market, they're really taking share and dollars from you, right? It isn't all ships rise with a rising tide. We no longer have that much of a rising tide. So any ships that do rise is probably because someone's sinking.
You mentioned market share. Can you give our audience just a little peek at what's to come?
Yeah, we talked about in the press release that between 2021 and the end of 23, the mass format, which is primarily led by Walmart, has grown from around 38% share of eGrocery to, at the end of the year, over 45%.
45, yeah.
And that's largely the largest share, understandably, is going to Walmart. So, we saw that acceleration of market share expansion by mass occur right at the tail end of the high inflation that we had. I think it was during 2021, early 2021, and has continued. And it's continued today, and we see continuing through at least 2024 as households still face some constraint on their spending. It may not be coming from higher prices on groceries because those things have really come down much faster than everyone expected, but simply from all the other things in life like rent or car insurance or daycare for my child, or I just returned to work and now I'm spending that extra $40 to $50 a day that I wasn't paying before. So those things are all coming to roost. And, grocery is one of those categories that have some buffer. In this case, people have to eat, so they're still going to buy groceries, but where they'll make the changes is what I buy, how much I buy, and where I buy it. And in this case, how I buy it, right? Online or in store. So I just think as you look at this going forward, realize this is the U.S. market forecast, and that we could see very different outcomes in forecasts for individual banners based on where they currently are positioned in the market, what capabilities they have, and what the trends are coming into the year.
Fantastic. Awesome. I think we've come to the end of the recording. Great insight as usual. And I thank you for your time and efforts in putting this insightful report together. I know it was not easy, but I think retailers would be hard pressed to find any other comparable report, or a report that professes to be comparable, that is as detailed and as insightful as the one that you've put together. So pleasure as always.
Well, I appreciate it, Mark. And as you know, we encourage and actually like to be engaged by the retailers to get their perspective on topic, to get their input, to make sure that we're sensing and seeing the market in a consistent way.
Fantastic. All right, that's it, folks. Until next time, I'm Mark Fairhurst at Mercatus, and you've been listening to David Bishop, partner at Brick Meets Click. Oh, David, I forgot to hit the record button.
Did you?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Well, we'll do it again.
I'm kidding.
I knew you were kidding, Mark.
You're more patient. You're more patient than I give you credit for.